Okay, we're going to start with our elastic binding today. So for this one, you already have these two pattern pieces, um, but it'll be just a single front, single back. So these are not on fold. And then these are the ones with no seam allowance at the armhole. So we'll cut one of each of those of our 4-way stretch fabric. And then we're going to get started with just sewing this together, turning it into a top. So I'll put these right sides together and stitch that shoulder and side seam first. And this is the sample or the demonstration for elastic binding. Okay, so we're just serging. This is my little side seam. This tail is not going to get crossed by another seam, so I do need to tie off that little tail, but this one will get crossed. So make sure to think through that as you're serging. Any area that is not going to get crossed, make sure to tie off your serge. Okay, now we've got this as a top. We're ready to put our elastic. We're going to do it on our armhole for this one, but we need to know how long to cut that elastic. So we're going to use our pattern pieces to measure our armhole. And I'm measuring right along that cut edge because we don't have any seam allowance, but I'm not including the seam allowance at the shoulder or the side seam. So just the finished length. So this back one is 5 3/4. This front one is 6 1/4. So 5 3/4 plus 6 1/4, that's 12 inches even. So we're going to use a fold over elastic. So this is a fold over elastic. When you look at it closely, it's hard to see on this screen, but there is a middle kind of like section that is knitted together differently. So it has a different texture to it. That is our fold line for this. So this is meant to be folded in half and stitched on. We need to cut it to that length plus a 1/2 inch seam allowance. So this one I'm going to cut to 12 1/2. Okay, pinning this onto our garment, we're going to have the overlap of the elastic go right down at the side seam so that it's hidden underneath our arm. So I'm going to start pinning right there. And again, this is going to get folded in half and it's going to wrap around the edge of your fabric. So your fabric is not actually getting folded back at all. It's just acting as like a little cap on your armhole. But you're going to I like to line it up with the back first and then fold over to the front. We're going to start pinning. This shouldn't have any excess, so we don't need to stretch it. It's the exact length of our fabric. And we measured that on the paper rather than the actual armhole fabric because we're working with stretch fabric. It's easy for the fabric to stretch out as you're trying to measure and you end up with a bigger measurement. So that's why we do it by paper. Okay, so we're just going to work our way around the armhole, pinning this in place. Make sure your shoulder seam serge goes towards the back when you overlap it. I'm going to go ahead and pause and pin this part right here. I want that 1/2 inch overlap, and I want to make sure that I've still got enough space here. So I'm going to go ahead and pin this so I know that I'm not stretching out my fabric as I pin. Gotta do a little readjustment. I'm getting it. So it may take a little adjusting to make sure that you've got that evenly spread throughout your armhole. Okay, now we're going to take this to our domestic machine and we're going to do an edge stitch along this inside edge of our elastic. We need it to stretch, so we're going to make sure that it is a stretch stitch on our machine. Okay, so a stretch stitch on my machine is a number 8. I'm going to go to the number 8 and I'm going to start down at this overlap, but what I want to do is I'm going to take this pin off for a second and I'm just going to stitch through that bottom layer first. I won't stitch through that top layer until we get back around our circle. So just take that little tail off and repin. There we go. My pen didn't quite catch all of it. There we go. Okay. So now I'm going to put this on my little arm. If you have this arm, it's just helpful, but you don't have to get it situated underneath my machine. There we go. So again, I've got that tail unpinned and we're just stitching through that single layer right now. and we're doing an edge stitch. This elastic is the same width front and back, so you should be catching the front and the back of the elastic at the same time, as long as you're folded right on that fold line of the elastic. Just double check as you go and make sure that your fabric is all the way into that fold so that you're fully catching the fabric. Double check as you go over that shoulder seam that it's pressed towards the back. Okay, once we get around to that overlap here, we don't want to see the raw edge of that elastic. So I'm going to tuck under the edge a 1/4 inch so that I'm folding under that raw edge. You might want to do it before you get so close to the foot. I forgot to do it before when I had more space. Okay. So then the finished product, you should have this stretch stitch at the edge of your elastic on the outside and on the inside. And that stretches, but it also helps kind of finish off your armhole, give it a nice clean look, and then also stabilizes the shape of that armhole.